So what is intergenerational trauma? In short, it describes the transmission and effects of collective trauma across the generations. And it usually refers to adverse experiences or tragic events that pose a threat to survival, such as natural disasters, war, genocide, political upheaval, act of terrorism, chronic famine, poverty, systemic oppression, imperialism, colonialism, forced immigration, just to name a few. And in the literature, at least in America, the term first was used in 1966 in the study of children of Holocaust survivors. And then in 2005, of children of pregnant women near the World Trade Center on 9/11. And recently, 2008, was on children of male combat war veterans. So as you can see here, the theme is, it's actually the study of the children of the trauma survivors, not necessarily the trauma survivors themselves, because these children, they actually find themselves reliving and re-experiencing what their parents might have gone through, but they suffer without knowing why. So that leads to the curiosity of trying to understand it. This term is also being used interchangeably with historical trauma in the literature on Indigenous people of North America. And it's also being referred to as transgenerational trauma, multi-generational trauma, inherited family trauma, hereditary and generational trauma. So if you run across these terms, they basically mean similar things. So for AAPIs, some of us might know our family immigration history, or we might not. So here's just a list of major events that happened in the 19th century, 20th century, and 21st century, wherever your parents might have immigrated from. If you were born there, if you experienced some of these or not at all, or maybe even your grandparents' generation as well. So kind of give you a clue of the historical context of where you might come from and what they might have experienced and brought with them when they immigrated to America or Canada. So there are three major mechanisms of transmission. It's called the 3 N's. The first one is nature, right? So biology. And this was made very clear in the study of the children of those pregnant women that was near the World Trade Center during the 9/11, where there was definite genetic changes to the fetus. And that lead to body memory, that the fetus might have inherited that. Also affect their cortisol metabolism, and cortisol is a stress hormone. It definitely can also change the nervous system of the growing fetus too, to orientate it toward more defense for survival purposes versus growth and development. And this is a short-term survival strategy. This is normal in stressful situation. It's preparing the fetus and the child to grow up in a stressful, potentially hostile environment. So we've got to prep the body. But if that system remains on and it never gets turned off, then that's when we would experience all of these difficulties later on in life. The second one would be by nurture, right? This will be how we were parented and also what behaviors that they model for us. There's also roles and responsibility, which is heavily influenced by culture and religious practices and beliefs. And so you can see a whole host of things like controlling, authoritarian, or permissive parenting. That can also lead to insecure attachment if the parent is not present, because they're still dealing with the trauma, the aftermath of where they came from, or maybe it's the things that they inherited from their parents as well. There could be a lot of family dysfunction, such as domestic violence, addiction that's going on, relationship issues, school, behavioral things, especially if you immigrated and you're younger and try to assimilate, acculturate to your new environment. That can also lead to a lot of maladaptive coping mechanisms, such as perfectionism and codependency, and of course, health issues. Most of the time, growing up in Asian household, we rarely talk about these things. So it might show up somatically, in our health, right? And that could means cancer, heart disease, liver disease. Lastly, would be about how these things were communicated to us. Right? Did we grow up in a household where it was silence? It wasn't talked about and nobody dared to ask. Or on the opposite end would be oversharing inappropriately, where it's constantly talking about it and there's just no break. And is the story being told, are they empowering and meaningful, or are they disempowering and victimizing? And how do those messages get internalized in the person, right, in ourselves, about the trauma, about who we are, about other people, and about the world? Is it a safe, welcoming place, or is it a scary, hostile place that we have to be careful? And these things, we might have conscious idea of it or conscious thought about it, but most of the time, it showed up in these inexplicatory feelings, very deep, intense feelings that might link to our own personal history of trauma, or it might not, such as shame, guilt, fear, anxious, depressed, a lot of repressed emotions or feeling of numbness, anger and resentment can lead to identity confusion, mental illnesses, of course, complex PTSD, and there are some strength as well, which is a story of hope, love, and resilience. So what are the impacts of intergenerational trauma? So with all those factors, it essentially combined to create a physical, mental, emotional, and psychological vulnerabilities to life stressors that get inherited through the generations. And if you can imagine all the events that happen through, essentially these last 3 centuries at all levels of society in one way or the other, and how that can show up is poor emotional regulation skills. There could be a lot of unconscious projection or internalization of intense feelings of persecution, aggression, shame, and guilt. Also affect our ability to communicate effectively. Right? This comes from what was the atmosphere that we grew up in. Again, was there a lot of silence around trauma issues or negative feelings? That can lead to a lot of indirect communication, confusing mixed messages, and a lot of ambivalence. We really don't know what to make of it, walking on eggshells. Or on the other hand, we were made to be the confidant for our parents, where they overshare everything. That's not very appropriate for, how old we were, or what's the context, right? And that can also show up in ways that we struggle to make meaningful connections in a healthy way. We can get into relationship both with our loved ones and our work. We can be enmeshed with people, or we go the other way and we become more avoidant. And of course, all of these together can increase the risk of mental illnesses, physical health complaints, and early death. Again, okay, so here's the big one. The effect of intergenerational trauma on family function. How does that affect our family? So let's say our parents were traumatized. They come from war-torn countries, are witnessing some horrible tragedies within the family as well, and they can't talk about it. So they might either exhibit traits of being the perpetrator or the aggressor or the victim, or sometimes both. And they also carry with them a lot of untold stories, unprocessed grief and losses, shame and guilt, unspoken secrets. Who knows what did they have to do when they had to survive, having to flee the country, let's say. Suppressed feelings, hard feelings that they don't want it to talk about or feel again or think about. Untreated or undiagnosed mental illnesses, for sure. unlived lives. How did those trauma and events affected their life? How did they derail their goals? Who did they have to leave behind? What dreams, hopes that they had to let go of, right? Who did they fail to marry, perhaps? And there's also a lot of wisdom and strength there as well. However, all these got possibly put behind the trauma, I call them the trauma closet, skeleton in the closet, don't touch it. There's a huge radioactive thing, like don't go there. If you go there, there will be a problem. Now, on top of that, you might put a mask on. So everyone in the family, all the family members got a role to play to keep the family functioning. So who's going to need to be the protector and the provider? Who's going to need to nurture? Who's going to need to be the emotional support person, right? So whether we know it or not, either we were assigned these roles or we step into them consciously or unconsciously because there is a need for this, right? Our parents might be not available to help us out. And I feel like with Asian parents, a lot of them want their kids to be the golden child, to be the hero of the family, to bring the, honor, the achievement, the success, right? So growing up, either you yourself or your siblings might be the golden child, which is the good girl, the helpful one, the smart one, the successful one, the high achieving, right? And their job is to make the family look good. You're like, yeah, there's no problem here. Yeah, we may have trauma, but look, we overcome it, you know? So kind of feed into the whole model minority myth as well. And there could also be the parentified child. That generally be the oldest, especially the oldest daughter. And you're essentially socialized within your gender roles to be the caretaker. And as you grow up, you could possibly, be an enabler or martyr in your own relationship with your significant other. And then, of course, there's the peacemaker, right? The one who's there to kind of smooth out the conflict, asking people to compromise. They might be known as the peaceful one, the one that just kind of want everyone to get along, right? Let's not fight about it. Let's smooth things out. So all three of these roles, you can switch in between them. Sometimes they collude with each other too. Sometimes the hero, the fixer, the rescuer can collude with the caretaker as well to kind of keep things under wrap. Don't rock the boat, so to speak. There's the less popular roles, and that is to help manage the pain and the PTSD symptoms from erupting. You can have the family clown. This is someone who like to distract the problem with humor, by lighting things up, right? There might be the charming one. Everybody look at me, so then you don't have to look at the problem. And then, of course, there's the scapegoat, the black sheep, very, very unfairly treated. They're essentially the carrier of the family shame, guilt. They can be labeled as the problematic child, the bad one. Well, they're the one with the problem. They're the one with the issues. Don't look over here. It's not us, right? It's not the parents or maybe generational trauma. And then you can have the wild child. That could be the same as the scapegoat, or it might not be. The rebel has a little bit more agency than the scapegoat. They might choose not to follow the family norms, not to follow the traditions. Like, I'm going to set out on my own and make my own way through this stuff, They may very well see what's happening. They're like, I don't want any part of this. Or they just want to piss their parents off. Lastly, there's the lost, invisible, forgotten child. This one, they might have grown up seeing, all their other siblings. They're like, well, there's already the hero. I can't do that. I'm too young. Maybe I can't be a caretaker. Or they definitely say, I don't want to be the scapegoat. If I speak up, if I do stuff, that's bad. So to protect themselves, and maybe like it's safer to be quiet, to not say anything, to hide in a corner, and that's okay. However, they can very well carry experience of feeling unseen, not important, that don't matter, and don't belong. So essentially, the last three roles there, the scapegoat, the rebel, the forgotten child, they very much could be classified as the outsider of the family system, but they're still very much in it. And like I said, these roles, sometimes you can grow up being the parentified child, but then when you come your adolescent years, suddenly now you move and you take over the rebel role. And vice versa. Somebody might grow up as a rebel and then something switch in them and they decide, you know what, now I actually want to be the hero, the rescuer. They might be moved by guilt or by shame. So what is underneath all the family drama, essentially? Whenever we think about family conflict, what is either being said, not said, or not being acknowledged? Right? We've got a whole mixed bag of stuff that's coming here. So it's just, that is why all these things were being locked up in the trauma closet, the skeletons. We don't want it out. Because when it does, anyone dare lift the lid, it kind of explodes into this kind of mess. It's not all bad. Within it, though, you can find glimmers of love, resilience, hope, and safety. I know that was a lot. I'm curious to know, what role do you identify with in your family dynamic? It might be one dominant one or multiple ones. And then also, what emotions or feelings you find yourself struggle with, either in that role or just in your life in general. Think about that for a moment and put it into the chat. All right, so let's talk about the challenges. Why is it so hard to break the pattern even though we can see it? That's because all these roles engage in supporting and reinforcing the pattern through enabling and controlling tactics, either consciously or unconsciously. And this, we got to look at the family code, the message, and its cultural value. Right? A lot of ingrained talk about what love means, sacrifice, the burden and responsibility of care. And what we were really drilled, at least for me in my head, was like having good education, working hard, and conformity as the key to success and happiness. But what happened when this isn't the recipe for you, or it doesn't work anymore, right, in this modern day and age? So these are just some of the common messages that we might have inherited. That family is number one. No one else will help you except for your family, right? They're the only one that you can trust and count on. So you got to stay close together. There's a lot of talk about sacrifice, right? How they come to this country for your future. They sacrifice so much for you, you cannot disappoint them, right? You choose something that they're not approve of, anything that's not enable you to still be their golden child, then that's going to lead to a lot of disappointment and anger and hurt. There's also the talk about it's your duty and responsibility to take care of your parents, no matter what, right? Again, they sacrifice so much for you, so you can't just abandon them. There's also the self-talk that you don't want to burden anyone with your problems. Yes, especially if you are the invisible lost child, like some of you were sharing there, where you don't want them to think, showing that you might be weak or a failure. But this also applies to those who are in the role of the hero and the golden child. Right? They're terrified of being found out, but maybe they're not the hero after all. And failure is just not an option. Or you might even tell yourself, your parents were hard on you for your own good. And now that you're successful on paper and in society, you should be grateful for what they've done for you. So therefore, you can't really challenge them or question the way that you were brought up, even though it might be legitimate. There's also a popular saying in Japan, right? The nail that sticks up is pounded down. So if you can imagine all those roles that's in the family system, and if one person dare to speak up or question anything, all the other people might come and start wanting to pound you back down again. So as you can see, there are a lot of external and internal factors to keep us playing those roles, even if we're feeling stuck, trapped, and burnt out. There's also an attempt at getting our emotional needs met by self-regulating through the family drama and crisis, because it's what we know, is familiar to us. Our body know how to react to those things. We've been playing those roles all our lives. And strangely enough, it gives us a sense of meaning, purpose, and a sense of identity from the role, both good and bad. Because if we actually start to develop the courage to step outside of that, we now have to sit with that existential question. Who am I without this role? Who am I then? What would I do? Right? And some might find that question a lot scarier than just continue doing what it is you've been doing. So of course we have to ask for the cost. What do the costs us? And Daphne, you mentioned it, you cannot be yourself. You cannot be your true authentic self. And therefore you also lose your autonomy, your choice of how to live your life, how to lead your life. It also affects your health. You also lose out an opportunity to truly build authentic resiliency versus hanging on to the family system and kind of getting your needs met through that way, through the drama, through the crisis. And also you might, miss out on your chance to live a fulfilling life according to how you want it to be, right? Because the family needs you. Of course, there is a role of the culture. That might be a barrier to our healing. Because like it or not, culture colors our interpretation, ideas, attitudes, perspective, and responses to issues. How we see it and feel about it is how we're going to treat it. And that get carried down the line. So this is my own conclusion here. The trauma might like the match for dysfunction, but it is the cultural values and family beliefs that provide the fuel for its transmission. So knowing that there's actually hope, there is something we can do about it, but also not to minimize all these barriers and challenges that's in our way. We got to fight through what has been normalized for so long. And then what happens when we start questioning things? There are mechanisms in place to protect it from being challenged or changed. It's highly resistant to change, does not enjoy change. You will be met with shame, guilt tripping, right? You've got a safe face. You can't do that to the family. You can't make them lose face. There's expectations of family loyalty, especially if we know, where our parents come from, what they had to suffer, all their trials and tribulations and hardship. We don't want to add that additional burden onto them. So therefore, we might be complicit in silence, obedience, conformity, playing a role to be the filial daughter or sons. We still have to practice deference to the elders to uphold the status quo, the patriarchal hierarchy. If we dare to speak up, immediately the extended family or family members is going to put us back into that box again, put that box back into the role. And lastly, stigmatization about mental health. And I see mental health as symptoms of what happened that haven't been addressed. So we just happen to live that out. So what is the path towards healing then, knowing all these challenges that we might encounter? I break it down to 4 steps. The first one is, of course, knowledge and awareness. And that's what we're doing here. That is, the more you can know about your family pre-immigration history, the more you'll be able to have a better understanding, have tools to work with to work towards your own healing. Of course, knowing the roles that you play in your family system and examining the factors that are keeping you stuck in the pattern. And this one's especially crucial and important. It cannot be bypassed if we were going to achieve long-lasting healing. And it's to feel, all those feelings that might be disowned, suppressed, rejected, all those must be addressed and acknowledged. What does that mean? To allow yourself to feel, to process your feelings and grieve as needed. And through that, hopefully you'll develop a greater capacity to be with difficult emotions, not just with yourself, but with other people as well. And that is certainly something that we need help with, support with, but it is very hard to hold all of it by ourselves. And through that, through both having the awareness and also the capacity to feel through what it is you're experiencing, it helps you know what it is you want and what your needs are. It helps really reconnect back to that true part of you that might have been lost or blocked away. And with those, as our awareness grow and as our strength grow, we now have choice. We can learn to create healthy adaptive coping mechanisms, increase our toolbox of how we can respond to things, and have a choice in the roles that we can play or not play, or change up the definition of what it means, right? We get to decide what messages to keep, to change, or to let go. And finally, get a chance to integrate and heal. We'll learn how to form a coherent narrative about the trauma within its proper historical context, able to depersonalize and say, this is mine, this isn't mine, and looking at it from an adult perspective and not just a child. And in doing so, get to reclaim the strength, our voice, our agency, and our own sense of identity, separate from our parents, separate from their trauma, and be able to live the life that we truly want to live. And of course, to integrate that into our lives, to give meaning to that experience. I love this poem. I think it's really fitting for our topic for tonight. Would anyone want to read it?
If children live with criticism, they learn to condemn. If children live with hostility, they learn to fight. If children live with ridicule, they learn to be shy. If children live with shame, they learn to feel guilty. If children live with tolerance, they learn to be patient. If children live with encouragement, they learn confidence. If children live with praise, they learn to appreciate. If children live with fairness, they learn justice. If children live with security, they learn to have faith. If children live with approval, they learn to like themselves. If children live with acceptance and friendship, they learn to find love in the world.
So, our reflection question: how does intergenerational trauma get transmitted in your family? You can either journal it or draw a genealogy or a social atom. I'll give you an example of what those might look like. And we already shared a bit about this here. What role did you play in your family system, and how did that affect you personally in your relationship, health, and career choices? And lastly, what changes can you make to help break the intergenerational trauma from passing? So if you feel so inclined there, you can create a genealogy, very straightforward. The circles represent female, the square represent male. You can draw X's through them if they are deceased. So that would be like your grandparents or great grandparents. And for this particular person, they break it out into 3 generations, and they kind of give a historical background of the immigration timeline, essentially. And you can write down like how old these family members are, because sometimes it's quite uncanny. Like you find out the age that your ancestors actually have a trauma that happened in their life. And then when you are at that particular age too, you also experience very similar things and you have no idea why. So this kind of helped map it out. And in places that you're not sure what happened, what's going on there, you can put like a question mark. but at least you have it on paper. So you map it. You can get as far as detailed as you want, as much as you can remember. That's one way to do it. Or this other way, where we do in drama therapy or psychodrama, is to draw a social atom. So you can start by making a list of names of at least 3 generational people in your family, as much as you can remember. Then using the appropriate symbol, again, circle for female, square for male. And this is where you can draw the relationship and the feelings in the diagram. So if they feel close to you, you place them close to you. If they feel far away or disconnected, you can put them really far away. If they feel big in your life, make them big. If they feel small, make them small. So essentially, it's like, how do they feel in relation to you? And that's quite interesting and telling. Don't think too much about it. Just kind of draw with what comes up for you, right? And you can put the name, the initial next to them, some details about them, their age, where they were born, their immigration history, any significant trauma or tragedy that happened in their life, any illnesses, potentially mental health, whether diagnosed, undiagnosed, treated, or not treated, and maybe their role in the family. It'll be interesting to compare it to the role that you find yourself playing. And then the lines connecting them, you can draw a solid line. That means you feel close or connected to them. And if you're like really distant or having a more rejecting type of relationship, draw a dash line. And if you feel indifferent towards them, wavy, hostile, zigzaggedy, ambivalent, and go out of the way, and do dotted line.